All right, welcome to the House Environment Committee. We're looking at draft number 2.3 of S25, which reflects changes that I asked to make based on input we have heard. Welcome, Ellen.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Yes, draft 2.3, the changes are highlighted in yellow. I did just want to let you know, there are 3 bills on the Senate floor, and so Kat's going to keep an eye on. So I may have a few extra. There may be more than just 11:30. It's yeah. So we'll see when I have to go to the Senate floor. So S25. So first on page 1, some parenthetical descriptors are added so that you can easily tell that section 1 is repealing section 19 of Act 181, which is the road jurisdiction trigger. And then section 2, repealing section 21, the tiers language. So it's the definition of the tiers, and then the tier 3 jurisdictional trigger are all in section 21 that's being repealed. But no substantive changes there. Section 3 affects the effective dates from 181. That hasn't changed. Section 4 is still repealing the tier 3 rulemaking provision. And onto page 2, section 5 is repealing the tier 2 area report. And that is being, oh, I guess this also should have been highlighted. I apologize. So section 5 at the top of page 2, you were discussing the tier 2 area report and possibly how to change that since you're getting rid of tier 2 itself. So later in this bill, so this provision is repealing that section, which is just a little more clean. And then there is a new report provision a little bit later in this bill to encompass some of what you were discussing around the tier 2 report.
A question?
No.
Okay. Section 6 starts with the statutory changes. So section 6081 is the exemption section of Act 250. And I will pause to say, it doesn't show this, but the prior version of the bill, section 6, was amending 6001. And 6001 had a couple changes in it related to the temporary exemption for priority housing projects. And that has been taken out of the bill. And so that statute will remain as it is currently with the existing priority housing project temporary exemption as it is currently in statute.
You put in the current statute here.
No. I took out the prior version, it was 6001. And so it's just been removed entirely. This is 6081, where the other interim housing exemptions are in statute.
Okay.
So the first changes in 6081 are on page 3.
Logan.
Yeah, we've gone kind of all over the place with this a little bit, so I'm hoping we could slow down just for a moment on the priority housing project piece, since we're eliminating the tiers. And priority housing projects will continue to exist.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, you were considering whether to update the definition of priority housing project.
That's what we've left out, is the redefinition, the amendment to the definition.
The amendment to the definition is not in here, as well as the temporary exemption on the cap for a number of priority housing projects that is left as it is right now.
So as it was in 181, it's January 1, 2027, with the half a mile around everything. And no cap would remain, but then it goes back to
What it was before.
what it was before, which was
Okay.
working.
Yeah.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I get a little confused here, but there was in the previous draft, what came up from the Senate, there was a year extension on that. On those
And we
projects,
decided to take it. Because
as well as the change to the definition that we wanted to. It didn't make sense about eligibility for tier 1B.
Right.
Approved, which is not what the word does.
Right. So we are going to just continue to let the priority housing project Act 47 expire on January 1, 2027.
yeah, and the difference between what's in statute today and what the exemption was is no cap. But in statute, it's 75 units. Ellen, remind us if it's tiered, is it tiered in statute or did we get rid of those? We were moving away from those.
Yes, there's only a couple of caps. So currently statute priority housing project, 75, up to 75 units can be exempt in a municipality with population between 6,000 and 10,000 people. And then in a municipality with a population of less than 6,000, up to 50 units can be built under the exemption. And then there is no cap on the number for towns that have a population greater than 10,000. So 50, 75, and then no cap for the largest towns. Okay.
Thank you. Do we know how many priority housing projects have we taken testimony on how many priority housing projects have been initiated under the temporary exemption? Email the HCB and ask.
And also, when this provision was originally enacted in Act 47, there was a requirement that those seeking to use the priority housing project exemption needed to get a jurisdictional opinion identifying that they met the exemption. And so the Land Use Review Board should have some data on that, on how many actually sought the JO to use the exemption.
Thank you.
On page 3 of draft 2.3,
One of the changes in that section that we have now removed was that exemption shall not apply to areas within mapped river corridor.
Right.
Which was something that we wanted to make sure that we were trying to avoid building in river corridors and floodplains. So we've just removed that addition.
Doesn't Act 121 already prevent that?
Yeah, but it's not in.
That's right.
I think that's true, but I also think if this is expiring in 9 months,
Now,
8 months from now, and it wouldn't go into effect until July. We've got a 6-month period where we're trying to do that for construction projects that are probably already in the pipeline. I guess I'm not adverse to still including it, but I'm just not sure it has
time for it to make.
really any impact. And I think we're trying to again, I've been a
Since we're
broken
not
record.
extending it.
I'm just trying to keep this bill as simple as possible. We just never really took hardly any testimony on this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, however, though, when does Act 121 implement? Getting the timelines for.
Rulemaking is all supposed to be in process, and it's already supposed to be done.
We do have that. I might have it here. I mean, we can look that up. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not unheard of that people are proposing housing developments even today in mapped river corridors that have recently flooded. We just had that come up.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems like
Unbelievable, but it does.
as long as we have a definition of priority housing project in statute, it seems like this would be a reasonable amendment.
We could put it into the existing priority housing part, but
Yeah.
maybe let's
Mhm.
hold, maybe it should apply to all of the housing. I mean, I think sorting through these exemptions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just make a note.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay, so in draft 2.3 on page 3, line 4, the ellipses are highlighted. In the prior version of the draft, there was the extension of the sunset on the exemption for ADUs. That is taken out of here, so that's that still says July 1, 2028. So the exemption for accessory dwelling units goes until July 1, 2028. And then also the exemption for the conversion of a commercial structure into 29 units of housing, that is also taken out. So that will also be July 1, 2028, the sunset.
what we're trying to do is line it up with the 1A areas coming online. And since these were July, we put the others to January 1 in this draft. These were July. We thought we shouldn't roll them back 6 months. We should leave them July 1. That's where this is coming from.
Right, so then with the interim exemptions under subsection DD, the first one now reads until January 1, 2028, no permit or permit amendment is required for the construction of housing with 75 units or fewer located within a new town center, growth center, or neighborhood development area. So it's taken out the addition of the subdivision 4 and mixed use development with the 75 units. The same is true for the exemption at the bottom of page 3. So this is the 50 units of housing. So it's again, January 1, 2028 for the construction of housing, not including the subdivision or mixed use development of. And onto page 4, it's 50 units or fewer of housing constructed or maintained on 10 acres or less, located entirely within. And so you all discussed this in committee the other day about whether or not to strike the 10 acres.
And it's a proposal to have it not be the parcel size, but to have it be the amount of the area the project takes up from testimony we heard.
Next, on page 4, subdivision 3, this is the exemption for housing in downtowns. And so again, January 1, 2028, construction of housing located entirely within a downtown district. So there's no cap on the number of units here. And again, the reference to subdivision and mixed use development has been removed.
Representative Chapin.
I guess I'd just like to share, because I'm the one who sort of proposed what we're looking at here, which is, so just to simplify and explain. The intention here was to take all of these Act 250 exemptions that were in Act 181 that came over from the Senate and align them all with the January 1, 2028 expiration date, except for the 2 that had a July 1, 2028 deadline. Leave those alone. So those came out. They're no longer even in the bill because we wouldn't be making any changes. And so trying to align all of this with a January 1, 2028, which is 12 months after all of the regional planning commissions have to have submitted their final land use area, future land use maps to the LURB. The LURB has 45 days to review those. So hypothetically, by mid-February of 2027, they should have made decisions on the last of those regional maps. And then there's another 9 months where municipalities who maybe didn't get approved for 1B or 1A could still request it. And in here, we have mapped out that those 1B requests by municipalities don't have to go through the entire region, like those can be made separately to the LURB. So this really gives a year where all of those future land use maps have been completed and time for municipalities to implement that 1A and 1B. There aren't deadlines in Act 181 around exactly when that would happen, so it gives a sort of a year buffer for all these exemptions to expire. And removes the pieces around mixed use development and subdivision that we really didn't hear any testimony on why that was important, or very limited. And is not so much about housing development. So that was the intention here, to sort of simplify and streamline those dates.
Representative Tagliavia, and then I'll.
I'd like to see this one stay to 2030.
Which one?
The one,
Number three.
let's see, yeah. The news draft 2.3, page 4, 112. It's reduced to 28, and then previous draft 1.2, it says 2030.
Can you share one?
It took a while for a lot of the complications in 181 to come out. 2 years, and we're talking about a 2-year difference here. Sometimes the information takes a while to get out into the public. And if it did, that's when people realized that they needed to wake up. And I just want to make sure, and if things go well, we can always come back and shorten up the date. I think it's going to be harder to lengthen it once this gets all the way through the process. And if we're really committed, I think if we're really committed to actually open up for housing, I don't see an issue with leaving it out to 20.
Representative Logan.
I hear you, Representative Tagliavia, and I also think it might be confusing for municipalities because the areas that we're talking about here would potentially be Tier 1B or whatever we're gonna call it, right? They would have designated downtown development districts with permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, et cetera, et cetera. Those areas are all eligible for that Tier 1B area. And so if that could potentially go into effect months before 2028, but then this is still in place until 2030, then it seems like we'd have two laws in effect at the same time in the same place, and that seems like it would be confusing. Am I correct about that?
Well, I think that's a question that I have for Ellen, kind of larger, which is what happens to these exemptions when a town opts in? And we need to add that to the statute. And yeah.
These exemptions sit outside of the opt-in division, so they exist independent of that.
So for me, that's a reason to keep them related to the opt-in, because in fact, I think people are assuming towns want this in their towns and we haven't asked them. And the way to make sure is to let them opt in and give them that opportunity. So I think for me, it sort of cuts both ways. Like if you're concerned about what the municipalities are thinking with this policy change, I would give them the chance to take it over. Representative North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with you, except that the opting in is kind of a more permanent thing, which your Tier 1B, your Tier 1B. Whereas this kind of gives towns the option to, well, let's just go with this temporary thing that's available till 2030. And then when it expires, and we can claim, all right, we're done with our development. And then they can just give it all back to the state for 250, Act 250.
This is not an opt-in. This is allowing it to.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying, so they could take advantage of something temporary rather than having to opt in, which is a more permanent thing. They may not be able to convince all of the members of their town that need to approve to opt in. And then they're stuck. Whereas,
Well, I guess I would just pose the question of, do you think that the towns should have a say only on the natural resource protection area?
do I believe the towns should have a say? Of course, the towns should have a say.
Okay, well, we've heard from towns that have voted no on these opting ins and having this happen. So I think the towns should be engaged and deciding their future.
I don't see how that disagrees with what I'm saying.
Representative Shape.
I guess the point is, there are towns that don't want these projects to happen and feel that they can stop some of these projects or control some of these projects with their existing bylaws, and they don't want Act 250 to be exempted. They don't want all of these projects to be exempted out to 2030. They want this process to end soon and for them to have, if they choose not to opt into 1B in certain parts of their town, that they want that choice. Municipalities want that choice. We're already hearing about projects that are, higher density or more units than the municipality, people that are part of the municipal process want, but they don't have any control over that right now because of these exemptions. So there's towns that want more housing, and towns that want less housing, and towns that want to say, and towns that don't want to say.
And I think we should have the look back study that was recommended to us this week in testimony and find out what kind of houses are being built and where and for whom. Because most of these exemptions are not constrained to workforce housing, affordable housing, or year-round housing. They are, we don't know. We just don't know. And they're going to have been in place for a number of years. And I think it's worth a future legislature having a chance to look back. You can always extend a date. It's actually much harder to retract a date.
Especially for development.
Yeah, so I would say this is still providing an answer to folks who want this and letting us as a body get data and understand what's being built, where, and for whom. Representative Austin.
Yeah, this is off topic, off topic, but off this conversation. So if you want to continue that, I can wait until the end of it.
I think I agree with you that it does cut both ways. I have a feeling that be overridden here, but I think I'm gonna stick with my position for now.
Fair enough.
I'm just wondering about the building envelope. I'm not a builder or anything, but is there any conflict with the building envelope for builders, like when they have to get materials, when they have to start building it?
All of these are also tied to when you apply for your permits. They have actually nothing to do with the construction season.
Okay,
So it's like when you get your foot in the door and show that you're moving in this direction.
Because it could, in theory, take a while for you to build after and your foot in the door, so to speak. And then you can still move ahead with the project even if this is expired.
okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you. Okay.
Next, at the top of page 5, the fourth interim exemption that was added in the Senate has been removed. So it's not here. This is the 50 units of housing in village centers without zoning.
Yeah, that was requested by the Senate and also by Let's Build Homes folks.
And I guess for me, I can't be part of having communities that are used to having Act 50 take over for larger developments being proposed, blindsided by this. These are towns that don't have bylaws or subdivision regs, and it feels like potential for conflict is high. Representative Logan.
I support this change. we didn't agree to drastically expand the scope of Act 181 this year.
Right.
That's what this would be doing. And I think that's a way more substantial policy choice. And if people still feel passionately about it, they can try again next year, because I think that is deserving of a very, very extensive process of testimony.
So how do we, how do we address and support the smaller areas that are not eligible for tier 1B, but have would like to designate their village centers to do some development? They're served by public sewer and water or have adequate soils. How do we let them take advantage of
Well-
like the exemptions that other people enjoy and that are, it's a rural versus non-rural issue when it comes down to.
I guess I don't know the number, and actually that's a note I have here. We have no idea what the universe of these communities would possibly be.
I thought we heard it was about half the towns don't have those.
But half though that they don't have, but who
A
has
less number of those have
public water and
public water
sewer?
and
Well, yeah, it would be
quite a
much
few
fewer.
less.
Yeah, much fewer to have.
It would be. So. Representative Logan.
Just a reminder that this was the piece that was added on the floor of the Senate that, with no testimony, that, where there would be no state or local review. So that's why this would be complete departure from 50 years of policy in Vermont to have no local review of projects. No local or state review of projects, and that the LURB pointed out puts lower income people at risk. Particularly, there's also not a flood, maybe we could add it, but there's no flood plain river corridor piece in this. This just allows like anything goes for
Zero
50
oversight.
or
Yeah,
less.
I get that.
Yeah, so I guess
Get that. I'm just trying
this
to.
was a really egregious piece that I think we have consistently been discussing taking out.
Yeah, and I would follow up on your comment, though, that the tier 2 study was supposed to be focused on that subject. So I imagine that those topics will still be included in whatever we call that study. And that it seems like a really great topic for discussion next year, next session.
Yeah.
Seems like a big piece to bite off. And we could have bitten that off a little bit more maybe this session, but we're doing this instead.
Okay, moving on.
On page 5, section 7. So I want to point out first, in the prior draft you looked at, there was the language regarding reconsideration and having the land use review board do reconsideration. And so that language has been removed because you discussed last time that wasn't maybe something you wanted to pursue currently. But so section 7 is here, and this section has not changed from the prior versions at all. This is still saying that it's the when towns update a municipal permit, they will pull in the conditions from an Act 250 permit so that the conditions may be enforced as part of the municipal permit. So no changes there. The next change is on page.
Representative Chapin.
Just before we move on, just going, again, I appreciate Representative Logan's encouragement for us to take this slow this morning. There's, especially when we've like removed something. So I guess I just want to go back to that denial of application and reconsideration process. And I'm wondering if we don't want to entirely lose this thread. I know we heard good feedback about why this needs more thought. But I guess I'm wondering if we want to actually make sure we have a recommendation come back from the LURB or on this.
I agree.
Um,
I don't want to lose this.
Representative Sheldon, I feel like we really had some good thoughts on this yesterday or 2 days ago. So this is,
Hopefully they're still around. Let's see if I can pull them up.
my notes were just like,
Yeah.
we want to consider changing the reconsideration from just going back to the same district commissioner that already denied something maybe going back to the verb. And then we also hadn't included here, also thinking about jurisdictional opinions reconsideration. Also currently goes back to that same district commissioner. But then it was pointed, and I think we might actually be expecting some feedback on this, maybe sorry, I'm just like
Yeah, so-
slowly bringing it all back. So I think the LURB is going to consider this on Monday and give us a recommendation about how we might approach this, or maybe so I just don't want to lose this thread, but I think we're actually waiting for some thoughts on the LURB.
Yes,
But it's no longer in the bill.
right. So
What section?
on the,
It's section 8.
Page 7.
okay.
Conservative version.
Okay. It seemed on the face of it to make sense.
Right.
To have the board reconsider a district commissioner or district commission, a district commissioner's decision on something, but then Brooke Dingledine was with us and she gave us a legal perspective on that, based on her past experience. And then the LURB said they would talk about this at their board meeting Monday and get back to us. So we hope to hear back from you on Tuesday. Yeah, we don't want to lose it and we don't want to unintentionally change something that has a reason for being the way it is. We may next year talk about upon the I imagine from what I know right this moment, upon the reconsideration, there could be another appeal, wrong word, reconsideration to the board. Anyway, yeah, that's that.
Thanks. I'm making a note for myself.
Okay. So the next change, there's new language on page 7. So this is approximately in the prior draft. Section 10 was looking at making changes to the tier 2 area study. But that is being repealed and instead this language is being proposed. Go ahead.
Was the main drafter of this idea, so you would like to speak?
Thanks. So I guess I'll just articulate that I think when we were looking at the tier 2 report and thinking about making some changes to it, there's some pretty big questions that were supposed to be addressed in that tier 2 report. Let me just find it. You can look at it for a second.
It was on page 10 in the prior draft.
Thank you so much. Page 10 of the prior draft. So, LURB was supposed to come back to us, the deadline's already passed and we would have had to change the deadline. Look at statutory changes to address fragmentation of working, rural and working lands, location-based jurisdiction, how it's working in basically the rest of Vermont or originally tier 2 areas, effectiveness of mitigation of impacts on primary ag soils, effectiveness of jurisdictional triggers on retail and service businesses outside of village centers, and review of whether and how Act 250 jurisdiction over commercial activities on farms, so accessory on-farm businesses. And my thinking is Vermonters have just told us that they want to be the first ones to weigh in on a lot of these topics. We just witnessed the public engagement processes of the LURB over there. I mean, they're only have been in existence for a little over a year. So, that's pretty engaging the public and working on some of this rulemaking is pretty new for the LURB, but it hasn't gone the way I think a lot of us felt legislative intent was in terms of working with stakeholder groups and engaging further with the public through the stakeholder groups. So I guess I'm proposing that we don't do the tier 2 report or even try and change it or fix it, because it's really the LURB would have to go out and do that work and instead pause and step back and take some time to think about what a real public engagement process would look like on sort of the remaining big picture questions that I think we have as a legislature and rural communities have around the purposes that are here in the middle of the page around, what are the risks to our critical natural resources that aren't well protected by current land use and regulatory policy? And it lists the ones that have come out of the work of the LURB when they assessed the different types of critical natural resources that we had put in Act 181, narrowed it down to the ones that weren't well covered by existing permitting programs. And it also includes agricultural soils, forest blocks. We might want to be broader here about working lands in general. And gets at the point around what, like, let's look much more broadly at regulatory and non-regulatory tools and think about what's equitable, not just what's effective. And start with a public outreach process. But I personally don't think in this kind of a time frame where we have to pass a bill in the next handful of days, we have time to design something. I don't think right now is the best time to start a public process. And so I'm proposing that we get recommendations by next January and then are in a good position next year to either take those recommendations or work on something related or unrelated, depending on how we feel about the recommendations that come to us. That's where this is coming from.
I'll just walk us through.
Sure. Yeah, so on page 7, section 8, I titled it Public Outreach Framework. I don't think you did. So if you have a more specific or appropriate title, please let me know. On or before January 15th, 2027, the Land Use Review Board shall contract with a non-governmental organization to develop recommendations for a public engagement plan. The contractor shall have expertise in maintaining neutrality on policy and political issues, statewide democratic public engagement processes, facilitation on public policy topics, and a proven history of effective outreach in rural communities. The purpose of the public engagement plan would be to gather statewide input from Vermonters to inform the General Assembly on the risks of losing critical natural resources not already well protected by current land use policy, including agricultural soils, forest blocks, habitat connectors of statewide significance, and headwaters, and equitable, efficient, and effective regulatory or non-regulatory tools to protect these critical natural resources. The board shall submit the report with recommended public engagement plan to the House Committee on Environment and the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee.
Add working lands.
Where would you like to add that? One.
Forest blocks, comma, working lands.
Ag soil.
That's in there.
Yeah.
Also, if comments are acceptable. Potential for number 2, then equitable, efficient, and effective regulatory or non-regulatory tools to protect these critical national resources. And the other thing we really heard from the people is property owners' rights. Is that something that needs to be considered in the protection? We really want to have Vermont being the way Vermont is. It's largely privately owned, and we got to work with the people who own the land.
Representative Logan.
Thanks. So this is a great step forward, seems like to me. I will say that we are now running up against an entirely different process that began in 2022 with Act 154 and the implementation of our environmental justice framework. And next July 2027, the Land Use Review Board is required to have a community engagement plan in place that articulates the environmental justice community engagement strategy that they need to have with environmental justice focused populations. And I've just had a conversation with the director of environmental justice at ANR this week. And it sounds to me, they have some requests for a change in deadlines. So I'm having some like background conversations right now about that are not ready for prime time. But it does seem like maybe we could figure out a way to weave these two things together, because I think that actually, and I don't know what the LURB board the board would feel. But it does seem like it would be helpful to have a contractor to help develop this environmental justice community engagement plan that they could somehow overlap.
Environmental Justice Community Engagement Plan is a LURB deliverable.
Yes. All the covered agencies in Act 154 are required to have their own environmental justice community engagement plans completed by next July,
And that was separate from Act 181.
separate
That's why we have.
and prior to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, when it was the NRB,
What's that?
when it was the Natural Resources Board.
Right, but we did update the language in Act 154 in Act
Yeah, yeah,
181.
no, it wasn't.
Yeah. So that's just like my first thought here. I'm just seeing this for the first time, so I actually think they're very compatible. And it would be nice to line those processes up. I'll also say that one of the things that the environmental justice, I don't know what you call it, division unit in ANR talked about, and this is going to sound really familiar to everybody. There's a deadline of January 2027, so that's 6 months prior to the community engagement plan. There's a deadline of having environmental justice focused population maps completed in January, and then a public engagement process completed in July, which now I think we can all agree might be out of sequence. Maybe we don't do maps before we do community engagement. And so in the questions that I asked the director, it sounded to me like she felt the same way, and that potentially postponing that deliverable until it's 6 months after the community engagement plans completed would be helpful and would give more capacity to the staff at ANR to provide technical assistance to covered agencies in developing their community engagement plans. Did that make sense? That was a lot of words.
Made sense to me, but
Okay.
it was, yeah, people may need to hear it again,
Yeah.
but, and I appreciate that and have a caution flag in the air for timing,
I know.
but and our ultimate task here, Representative.
Yes, I've just been watching a lot of these hearings, the consolidation, public engagement, this public engagement. It just seems to me that the people that show up are the people that are opposed
Mhm.
to the legislation. Because I wouldn't speak up at one of those meetings in favor of the road rule
No,
or
it might be
in
hard.
favor of tier 3. Really, I just wouldn't. It's intimidating to me. And I just want to make sure that people who are in favor of something somehow are represented.
I think that's a really astute observation. I think people do show up when they're against something, and it's harder in general to get people to show up there.
I mean, in this
Or-
consolidation, I think one person spoke and, people were kind of neighing and not booing, but, it's just so I want to hear from everybody, not just people who are opposed to something.
Yeah, people who stand to gain from something,
Right.
right? Representative Tagliavia.
I'm going to rewind to my comments on the day that it was announced that repeal of the road rule and tier 3 mapping were on the table. Quite a few years ago, I began going to planning commission meetings and select board meetings, and it took a while to get people to show up in opposition to some of the things. And it was because they had been disheartened. They felt like they were not being heard. So there are two sides to that coin, and it depends on the issue you're talking about and the way the political winds blow. So that is definitely a two-sided coin. I've met numerous people who, after a meeting, would approach me and say, "Hey, Mike, I agree with you. I'm glad you spoke up." And people started to speak up when they felt that they were not alone. So just wanted to make that comment.
Representative Chapin.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with both of you more. I think that what we heard from Paul Costello was that that is really common when there's a policy choice on the table, as opposed to stepping back and starting with like, what do people in the community care about? And so I really heard the importance. I've heard it from Vermonters who have been communicating with us, and I heard it from Paul Costello that when you, I mean, in a politically charged landscape like our time right now, it's hard in many ways, but when you start from a place of just genuinely wanting to hear all voices and not with a proposal already on the table, but that really gets at what you're talking about. When you have a school consolidation proposal on the table, people are going to come out who don't agree with it. So I guess I just,
Yeah,
I think
that's a
that's,
really good point.
I think we can take both of what you're saying. It doesn't matter what position. It's when you put a position on the table and then ask for a response. That's what happens. But so the intention here is to back up and not have the LURB putting out maps, not have the EJ, program putting out maps and then asking for a response, but trying to really step back and do a much, it really takes, it's going to take a lot more time, but it's going to be a better process and it's going to give us better outcomes. So that's the theory here. Yeah, but thanks for,
Representative Austin.
Yeah, I thought that was the process. I thought the LURB was putting out a draft map. And that's my understanding.
That's what they did.
That's what they did.
Right,
It was
and they were gonna be
but it
taking two
wasn't-
more iterations. They were taking public input.
Yeah, I think,
And
That's not.
I'm just wondering how that happened, because that was my understanding. And about the rules, they were gonna be taking public input. So did that not get communicated? I just want to make sure people understand when something's a draft and there will be public comment, an opportunity for public comment, or, I don't think we've ever just said, this is what we're doing and handed it down. I don't ever remember, as someone on the planning commission or in a committee, it's always in public engagement to get input. And then make revisions that the public input informed. So I guess the process, I just want to be really clear about because we have to sometimes put out something saying, what do you think? What are your thoughts to the public? And not have people think this is being imposed on us, as opposed to you're going to have an opportunity to provide your opinion.
Representative Rogan.
Yeah, I think one of the so first of all, I think that we may be finding a sore point with the way the process has been conducted.
Yeah.
Because there hasn't been enough initial public engagement around a question. Like the question being posed here is, how can we avoid losing these things that we want to keep?
That gets back to what Ella was
Yeah.
referring to.
Yeah, that's like that first point here in the study or in the community engagement or public outreach process is, that's a question that you can pose to communities. What are the risks to us if we do this? How can we avoid it? What are tools, regulatory and non-regulatory tools? And so it's basically like ground truthing with the community prior to developing a policy proposal. And then you would still do the public engagement process on the policy proposal as part of its adoption. I'd say, in my opinion, based on what we've seen happen, I think Act 250 was particularly unique because the proposals, especially the way that they were presented, of the road rule and tier 3, brought a lot of people into the Act 250 process who've never been involved in the Act 250 process. We're talking tens and tens of thousands of people who have never had to consider going through the Act 250 process, that all of a sudden were told a lot of misinformation, frankly, about the process.
Right.
But nevertheless, like if that's the only thing you hear and no one has taken the time to walk you through this permitting process that you've never had to think about before, it's going to be shocking, especially if there's political flames being fanned, which there were. So I'd say this is a really, really positive step back to do that first initial step and like bring the community along with.
Yes.
So utilize Ellen's time.
Yeah.
Can we come back to
should-
this
We should keep
conversation?
walking through with
Yeah.
Ellen because she's gonna leave soon.
Sure. So next on page 8 and 9, a couple of changes have been made to what is now section 9. This is the oversight committee. So just a couple of changes here. It's been renamed to the Joint Legislative Environmental Oversight Committee. And so that's changed on line 4. Additionally, the committee shall elect a chair and vice chair. It took out a clerk. And then the committee may meet 8 times. Previously it was 6. On page 9, the assistants. So it's the administrative, technical, and legal assistants of Joint Fiscal and the Office of Legislative Counsel. And then under the duties, the committee shall oversee the Land Use Review Board, the implementation of statutes as part of Act 181 instead of rollout. Implementation seemed a little more formal. And also oversee the Agency of Natural Resources and their permitting processes instead of process. And then there's a sunset that's being added. So the committee shall cease to exist on July 1, 2029.
Representative Tagliavini.
I think this should be added to one of those notes is not at this time. It's new and we're trying to get through this. And I think this needs more time and more thought.
What is your?
It's just, I like the initial idea of it. I just want us to be able to be a little bit more deliberative about it and make sure that we're not throwing rocks in the gears trying to fix a problem. So something, I can't put my finger on it right now, but it just says like when, Representative Chapin brought out, make notes about some things that should be considered later on. This just jumps out at me as not this session, next session.
Representative Chapin.
I do agree. It's a substantial change.
Yeah.
I also feel like the time is now and Vermonters are so unhappy with how the LURB took on what was in Act 181. And because the LURB is such a new entity, to me, this is the only time to consider oversight. And I think the LURB needs oversight and better communication. Like, I think that if we had this in there, I don't think we'd be where we are today. So that's just my theory of why it's a now issue, not a maybe consider later issue. So, but I definitely appreciate that this is a big thing to add.
I think it is.
I guess I think it's a medium thing. I think it's our responsibility. I think it codifies our responsibility to engage in things that we have initiated and will help us have better communication with the LURB and the Agency of Natural Resources during the open session. So I see it as a clearinghouse for issues that arise when we're not in session and that need to be addressed in a timely fashion. And it has we added the sunset for a look back, check in, and talked about the precedents for other areas of statute and government operations. So I feel like time is now, and it would really be a benefit to Vermonters. Representative Sakowicz.
Yeah, I would echo that and just add that, this would have been helpful for a number of different issues that have come up over the last number of years where we are out of session longer than we're in session, and having that connection with the LURB and with the Agency of Natural Resources while we're not around could really help us head off issues in really helpful ways for everybody. So I think the idea here is not to add conflict to the way that we're doing things, but to actually reduce it and to make things, to catch things before they become a problem. It does seem clear that there's been a number of issues over the last few years that if a legislative committee had had the opportunity to weigh in during the off session, we may have been able to avoid things which we would all, I think, agree that we would like to avoid.
Representative Norton.
Uh, What you're describing, or what's being described as oversight during the off season, to me, sounds exactly the opposite of what we've just heard from the public, that they don't want this top-down control. And I mean, that's why we're very carefully trying to construct this public engagement process. And here we're implementing something that's, again, top-down control. The things that really stand out to me, like, woo, this is big and definitely requires some we haven't heard any testimony on this as to the problems we're trying to solve. The little section on duties here, words like oversee are in there twice. What does that even mean? How much authority is this small group of 5 people going to have? I mean, I think we need to, I think we need a minimum take some testimony on this. What problem are we trying to solve? And what are the there's not isn't even a section in here that describes the authority that this group has. So this to me is a big red flag.
Representative Austin.
I just want to clarify what you're saying. So you don't want any oversight over the LRP
No, this group right here has oversight.
when we're in
We-
session?
Yeah, exactly. And we convey what we want to them via statute. That's the way legislature works.
Right.
So having some subset, some small body permanently in place, well, permanently
all-
until 29,
Yeah.
in place that has, it appears, I don't know what oversee means, but the ability to make real-time decisions on behalf of all of us and just direct what's going on. That makes me very nervous. Makes me very nervous.
I get confused because I feel like I'm hearing one thing one day, and then when we try to find a solution, you don't like the solution. So is that just me, or I'm just,
I don't know what
I
the problem-
just-
I don't know what the problem
I
is we're trying to
thought you
solve.
wanted, my understanding was that people, the public,
Yeah.
wanted more oversight over the LRP. Just
But
wanted.
no, they wanted to be engaged. They didn't
Well-
want,
I mean, I'm sure this committee would engage the public.
doesn't say.
I mean-
Okay, we're not giving,
Sorry,
it's still
sorry.
valid for a limited amount of time.
Sorry.
I'm gonna let
I just get confused.
Representative
about what
Logan.
people want.
We can move on if we want to come back to discussion on this at another time
that's
and finish reviewing.
probably a good
draft.
idea, yeah.
Okay.
So in draft 1.2, the prior draft, there was also a section 12, which was the discretionary review of housing report from the Department of Housing and Community Development. And you all did discuss the other day striking it, and so that has been removed.
Sorry, what? Okay, on the previous-
That was the bottom of page 13 into page 14. The Department of Housing, looking at model codes.
Like they were already gonna do that work.
Right, we all agreed on that, yes.
That's one of those things. The study group.
Next, so that's gone. It's time. Okay, there really are only 2 other changes I'll say before I go. In the regional planning statute, it has been changed back to non-minor from major, and so I really wasn't sure where you landed on that. It currently in this draft says non-minor.
Agreed, just because it's the way they brought the line over and it's awkward, but it's the definitions.
Yes, thank you. So, and then I will just say the only other, I believe the only other change, and I'm sorry if I'm missing one, is that on the last page, page 24, there is a new, it's a session law provision about formal review of regional plans. And so you all were discussing about whether or not to repeal 24 VSA 4476. And so this is some language to consider if you'd like the LRB to form a formal opinion on whether or not that should be done. And so I'm going to go now, but I will be available.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
I just further explain this
Yes.
section, so I ended up drafting this. So this was that.
Where are we?
That's, so if you go to, where is it in the previous draft? In the end of the previous draft. This was, so
It's actually so many pages in the middle. It's the reason we went from 33 to 34 pages. We took this. It was the part that made it longer, you know.
I'm just trying to find it. So this was the piece that had been repealed. by the
Draft
Senate
one.
It starts at the bottom of page
1.2.
25 on 1.2.
So this, what came out from the Senate, this was that old section of statute that no longer had a body to do the work, but was a way for regional plans to be reviewed or appealed, really, reviewed and appealed. And it was no longer seeming functional statute because the body that to do it had already been repealed, in 2012 or something like that. So, and we looked at all the language in the last draft, and I think the general sense of the committee was like, oh, this isn't like, we don't want to just lose the opportunity for certain kinds of entities to be able to request a review or appeal. But again, this isn't like something we really have time to tackle right now. So this is a suggestion for how to get at this, and just to ask the LURB to look at this repeal and make a recommendation whether to repeal it, and if we are repealing it, what kind of a framework either already exists or we could build to make sure that there is, now that regional plans have this increased significance around the tier 1A and 1B for municipalities, it seems really important to have this kind of look back for landowners or municipalities and other entities that have something to lose.
Whether they are the RPC or not, any entity.
Yes, there's a list of 6 different kinds of entities that is in that. So instead of repealing this, we're leaving it in statute, even though it's funky. We don't know how effective it is. Might not mean anything still. Not do anything right now, and ask the land use review board for their legal opinion on how to make sure there's a structure for it.
So where was that section of statute
yeah.
repealed?
In the Senate
It was
version, it just
The
said.
bottom of page 25. Are you looking in our bill?
I'm looking at 1.2.
Yeah.
Want to come back?
Bottom of page 25. Great. Alan's back. Bottom of page 25. It's sorry. But they repealed it, and then we put it in to look at it. And there's a lot in there. I feel like this is a good solution. Yeah. Okay. Other questions for Ellen? We heard from Ben Doyle the other day, and Katie Gallagher, are you prepared to talk about ideas for study? I think is basically what it is. Yeah. Sure. Okay, great. You'll stay with us as long as you can.
Yeah, no, I'm done now. They already.
They're finished. Oh, okay, great.
Yes, they went extremely quick.
Helpful. Katie Gallagher with the Vermont Natural Resources Council. So this will be a rough kind of introduction of some thoughts, but following up on Ben Doyle's testimony last week about how we could better strengthen the community investment program in terms of the new future land use categories being expanded through S325 to include non-historic planned new and emerging centers. And so Ben had recommended the potential of having a 3-year look back. And so we talked, I put a little bit of thought into this, and the committee, I think, could go a number of different ways, but trying to keep it relatively simple. And I'm sorry, I did not have not shared this language with the full committee. But the goal would be to try to identify, how many of these planned new or emerging centers are actually taking place in those regional future land use maps, and then the corresponding benefits that they would be getting under the community investment program and Act 250 exemptions. And then are those benefits that they're getting, so there's one kind of an impact on the program and what that impact is, because again, as you heard from Ben, the expansion of these community areas that would be eligible for the community investment program is already expanding really significantly. So what is the impact on the program? And then are we still able to effectively achieve state goals related to community planning and smart growth principles? Is that still being achieved through these planned new and emerging centers? Are there any areas through this review that we might identify other opportunities for better alignment between state land use policy goals, regional planning, related to housing and development in particular, and trying to avoid sprawl and impacts on working lands and natural resource protection. So my initial kind of run at this was looking at a report coming back to the legislature, January 2030. That would give, if all the future land use maps going to be done roughly beginning of 2027. So that would be 3 years from that kind of start point. We would ask the Land Use Review Board in consultation with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, the Agency of Natural Resources, regional commissions, and other stakeholders that are representing different land use issues to submit a report that would evaluate the role, performance, and impacts of these emerging downtown and village centers. You were talking earlier this morning about the interim housing exemptions as well, and I think that you could also expand this to include those kind of larger areas planned for growth. How do the interim exemptions work? What were some of the impacts? So again, looking at the eligibility and use of benefits for the community investment program and Act 250 exemptions. You can look at a comparison of the different types of communities, the development outcomes, impact on the designated centers, both positive impacts, neutral, negative impacts. I have kind of a list of different things. And again, I think you can expand or narrow this to the extent that makes sense. I know that you're trying to keep things as simple as possible here. So I can send the language that I was thinking about here and talked with Ben about. But really, yeah, the idea is just to take a better look at this relatively significant change and see how it's impacting our existing programs that are trying to make really targeted investments. And if there are recommendations for moving forward and supporting emerging centers alongside our historic centers.
Members have questions? Representative North.
So there, in the brand new draft 2.3, is there language or space for language like what you're talking about?
There is not current language in the newest draft. I think that would be up to the committee to decide whether that's something that you're interested in.
Do you have some recommendations for us?
For language?
Yeah.
I do.
You can look at that. Yeah, we can look at, I mean, I didn't know if you were ready to share it. We just Ben had said he would submit something and Ella circled back, and so here we are. So kind of happening.
Make some further refinements probably to share it out, but yes.
Okay.
Interesting idea.
Yeah, okay. We will work on this, look at it further. Questions for Katie Gallagher? Representative Chapin.
I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around some of this. So my understanding is if we had tons of resources for the community investment program, we wouldn't worry so much about these expanded land use categories and how they're starting to be inclusive of planned or emerging growth centers or village centers. Meanwhile, we've got, it feels like pressure on municipalities to look at emerging growth centers, particularly because of our pattern of historic development in flood zones. And maybe that's not the only reason that municipalities would be looking at new planned and emerging growth centers, but certainly a really, particularly for our rural communities, a really big driver. And so we're trying to balance here limited resources and targeted resources that have historically been very focused, as been beautifully articulated in his testimony. So yeah, I just wanted to confirm that that's sort of the issue, but narrow resources, and really we want to say, how are they being deployed differently over the next few years, and what impact does that have?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And I would just note that I think the language related to the plan and emerging centers, to your point, that can include areas that are looking for new centers because their historic centers are having repeated flood events. It could also mean an area of Route 7 that just wants an Act 250 exemption. So because these areas are not very well defined, that's another, kind of place where there's just not a lot of specificity as to how the investments that we're making are specifically targeted.
Members,
Would I have something else I'd like to propose?
okay, now's the time, I guess.
I guess I just want to share with the committee that, this is this new language that, I took a stab at drafting for the committee, on page 7 around public outreach, community engagement, planning for community engagement. There's one other sort of central question that I wonder if we should add to it, and it's around public input on just how Act 250 and A&R permitting works.
That's huge.
It's huge. And personally, I think the legislature already has a pretty good grasp on what does and doesn't work. I think,
We hear about what doesn't work. We don't hear about what does work.
sure, I guess I'm just putting on the table, I did draft an additional sentence, just like this morning at, 9:30, and, I can send it, we discussed some tweaks to this. I have some tweaks and this additional sentence, so maybe I'll put that in an email to the committee so that people can just think on it over the weekend.
I'm wondering about, I feel like there's something already in process on this. Am I remembering that right? Permitting,
About what?
permit review kind of task force. Anyway, let's look into that. Before
Yeah,
we
it's
add,
hugely
it feels too big to me to add here. So, and also maybe to this, like, I think one thing about the public outreach thing that I've been thinking a lot about, maybe, is just, well, first of all, I think it needs to be focused, and it has to be really clear what we're looking for before we go out and then I think the bigger it gets, the less clear it will be. And, yeah. Your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I was just gonna echo that. It seems like the questions that we're trying to have answered in this public outreach process would be drowned in that conversation. They would just be completely lost. Cause that's like, those are two very different conversations, because this is sort of like a pre-policy development conversation that needs to happen so that we can problem solve together instead of, and frankly, I'll be honest, I think the executive branch should engage in community engagement processes to reflect on how successful it is at implementing our statutes in the first place. So I kind of feel like they shouldn't need to be told by us to ask people what they think. Like,
How are we doing?
how are we doing? Like, it's like their job to serve Vermonters. And it's not our job to tell them how to do their jobs. unless it's going really badly. And so I'd prefer to see that sort of like done on their own, frankly.
Great, thanks. I just needed to say that bigger question out loud because I know a lot of people feel like we also need to be looking at that.
Yeah.
I agree that it would drown the rest of this, so thank you.
And this kind of is a plan for a plan, for what we're asking for here. So I think that kind of detail goes into the next plan that's being planned. This is just the plan for the plan.
And or it's happening already, so I think it's worth asking that question.
Yes, I would love to know more about whether it's happening. Thanks.
Okay, members. I think with that, we will adjourn for the day.